short and slim, and had a tattoo on her arm reading, DR. A forensic analysis revealed that she had undergone a hysterectomy at some point in her life, which might point to pregnancy complications, treatment for ovarian cancer, or even darker, routine treatment at a psychiatric hospital in 20th century America. The hysterectomy didn't have anything to do with her death, however. That came about because of a bullet wound to the head. Other than the surface level information, nothing else could be gathered to tell this young woman's story. So, using 1981 technology, the police made a crude clay model of her head, depicting what she might have looked like before she passed to see if the public might be able to identify her. But nobody ever came forward. With no leads and nowhere to look, the police just stopped investigating. Life would go on the same as it did before. Nobody would ever grieve this woman. Her story would never be told and justice would never be served. She would never even have a name, only ever being referred to as the Richmond Jane Doe. And unfortunately, she's not a unique case. Currently, in the United States of America, there are more than 10,000 unidentified bodies. The idea of just coming across a body that never gets identified has to be one of the most disturbing concepts I can think of. In fiction, there's a common trope of an angry spirit haunting a place desperately trying to get somebody to tell their story, and these movies and books usually end with a tragic tale of their death finally being told, putting the ghosts at peace and allowing them to move on. Horror usually ends up being scarier than reality in most cases, but in this particular realm, reality is much darker than fiction. In real life, the body and the person that occupied it just stays lost forever. Their only memorials are scattered disconnected case files in different law enforcement agencies. In some cases, loved ones are desperately trying to get answers, unaware that the person they're searching for has already been found. But even darker than that, a lot of these people go unidentified because they've just been forgotten about, and the world callously moves on without them. When the Richmond Jane Doe briefly held the attention of law enforcement agencies in the early 1980s, criminal investigations mainly relied on traditional tangible evidence, like eyewitness accounts, fingerprints, and ballistics analysis, but a new movement had been gaining momentum. Instead of just looking for measurable evidence in individual cases, criminal profiling had police identifying characteristics of crimes that could point to the perpetrator's psychology in some way. This had law enforcement investigating previously overlooked aspects of crimes, like the degree of control used by the offender, the escalation of emotion in the act, and how organized or messy the crime scene was. Identifying these characteristics allowed police to not just categorize the sort of suspect they were looking for, but to also link different crimes together in a way they weren't previously able to using only traditional investigative techniques. But there was a problem blocking that last part from coming to fruition. Back in the early 1980s, law enforcement agencies were more or less working in isolation from one another. Pierce Brooks would testify before Congress to advocate a radical new idea: a computerized database to track unsolved crimes that could be accessed by any law enforcement agency in the country. This database would be set up in such a way that the seemingly minute details of different crimes could be linked together, helping investigators make connections they wouldn't have previously been able to make. Brooks' idea was received enthusiastically, with the FBI fully picking up and funding the project. The database would be built and stored at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia in 1985, and while it may have started out with the thousands of different law enforcement agencies around the country having to mail in handwritten forms that would be digitized by hand in Quantico, the procedures would advance over time as the world became more connected, first through fax machines, and then through an interesting new technology called the internet. In the 2000s, the FBI would launch FICAP Web, a fully internet-based version of the database that could be instantly accessed and browsed by law enforcement agencies. While FICAP Web was and is only able to be accessed by verified law enforcement users, the FBI would also create a much more limited but publicly accessible version of the database, which you can browse through a website hosted by the FBI. When we talk about things that are scary on this channel, there's usually two categories. Fictional horror tends to be very dramatic and solely relies on artistic elements like aesthetics and storytelling to create fear. It's by design calculated in its delivery. Real-life horror, on the other hand, is never calculated. It's not art designed to strike fear in you, yet it always does a much better job of that than fiction. The FBI's VICAP site is a perfect example of that second category. It's just a cold list of unsolved crimes presented in a manner only meant to convey information in an efficient way and nothing more, but it still manages to be one of the most disturbing sights I've ever seen. Here you'll find the Richmond Jane Doe, as well as many other unidentified deceased people. The visual depictions of these individuals range from actual photos, to digital recreations, to physical recreations, to drawings, to even just articles of clothing in cases where the body is in such bad shape that clothes are the only remaining identifying traits. This entry is particularly unsettling. The only lead investigators have in this case is a single shoe. The remains were in such bad shape that even the victim's sex couldn't be determined. Like the vast majority of cases here, this one remains unsolved. I find it interesting how VICAP sits beside the FBI's top 10 most wanted lists on their website, as these two pages feel like yin and yang. The top 10 most wanted are a list of perpetrators of crime they're actively trying to catch. Or in other words, stories they're trying to put resolutions to. VICAP is a list of victims of crime they're trying to identify. Or rather, resolutions they're trying to put stories to. The two sites feel like binary opposites. Another thing you'll notice on VICAP is how unsettling a lot of these photos look, even completely separated from their chilling contexts. These reconstructions often fall into the uncanny valley, with the people they're depicting looking almost real but not quite, leaving any viewer unsettled. A lot of these depictions look not unlike something you would see in some online horror project, but not everything creepy looking. Here is a reconstruction. On June 3rd, 1991, truck driver Eduardo Cullen pulled into a Super 8 motel off of I-40 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He rented a room for 2 people for just one night, but the following morning, Eduardo never came to check out. After waiting an entire day, the motel eventually sent a security guard to check on Eduardo's room on June 5th. It had been locked from the inside, and the guard had to essentially break in using a screwdriver. When he finally got in, there was no one to be found in the main part of the room, just scattered bottles of alcohol. The bathroom was a different story though. In there, the security guard found a woman suspended in the air, hanging from a suitcase strap tied to the shower. She was dead. Investigators would determine her cause of death to be hanging, which was found to be self-inflicted, and had occurred on June 3rd, the night the room was rented. Even though she had only been deceased for 2 days, the shower had been running the entire time, and the extreme amount of moisture combined with the sweltering New Mexico heat greatly advanced the decay process, and her body was already in a state of putrefaction when she was found. She had heroin in her system, and judging by the fact police found a scale in the room, drugs may have played a part in this tragedy. Many questions hung in the air about this case, the most immediate of which being Eduardo's whereabouts. He was nowhere to be found. The license plate he had given to the hotel staff had been fraudulent. The front desk employee who had been working the night of June 3rd was able to give a physical description of Eduardo, which happened to fit a picture found in his room. While they were looking for him, when police asked family members if they had recognized the woman in his photo with Eduardo, they only reacted with confusion. The man in the picture was not Eduardo. Again, no progress would be made for an enormous amount of time, until 2021 when investigators actually managed to somehow track down the man in this photo. While his identity has never been released publicly, the police are not considering him a suspect in any possible crime. He also wasn't able to fully identify the woman, only telling police that she had come to Albuquerque from Los Angeles, that he only knew her as Becca. The initial and most common theory regarding this mystery is that Becca may have been a lady of the night. Also found in the room were 5 $100 bills, an oddly large denomination of money to be carrying around with you, especially in 1991. It would explain why she was with a truck driver at a motel and why she didn't have any ID. The police have also supposedly recovered more pictures of Becca while she was alive, but haven't released them publicly because of their supposedly explicit nature. Whether Becca was an escort or not ultimately doesn't matter. Investigators assume she was, and her case likely didn't get the attention it needed because of that. If Eduardo had been located before his own death years later, this case would have been solved more than 20 years ago.